Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome, and for those of you who are not here in the room with us in cyberspace, welcome. I've never broadcast to YouTube before, so it's a first for me. My name's Carrie Hewitt. I've been working with Dorothea and Gino and Town of Sherborn on the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, and very excited to have you all join us tonight for this important panel on building efficiency. I have three awesome panelists with me tonight. Before we jump in, I just wanted to also thank our partners. We collaborated with Wellesley and Medfield, Wayland, Ashland, Eco Natick, as well as the 350 MA Upper Charles groups to put this event together. So really excited to have you. If you're joining us virtually, we're glad to have you on board. Our panelists tonight include Brad Corralius, who is a member of the Sherborn Energy and Sustainability Committee. We have a couple other members here in the audience tonight, so thank you for joining us. Keith Lewis, who is a certified passive house builder, and John Hyde, Senior Sustainability Manager with Chapman Construction. I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves as we get underway. And they each are going to talk a little bit about their own personal experiences with deep energy retrofits in their own homes and with changes in the building code over time, as well as their experience with buildings and net zero buildings in general, and some of the benefits they've all seen in those homes. I'm just going to do a little bit of setting the stage for us before I hand it off to our panelists tonight. So some of you may be familiar with Massachusetts' efforts to decarbonize, part of a global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But in 2021, the governor signed an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy. And as part of that, the state committed to a 50% emissions reduction by 2030, as well as a 75% emissions reduction by 2040, and aiming for net zero by 2050. And so there's a few different facets of that the decarbonization roadmap laid out for us, and touching on transitioning buildings and vehicles to electric, decarbonizing our electric grid, working on carbon sequestration efforts as well. Tonight, we're going to be focusing more on the building sector and what we can accomplish there. And on that note, Sherborn is also doing its part in Massachusetts statewide efforts to decarbonize as well, having declared a climate emergency at the last town meeting last year in April, where we are also, as a town, aiming to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and working to reduce emissions as quickly as possible in advance of that as well. So that sort of sets the stage for some of the work that the town is doing around our Climate Action and Resilience Plan. Some of you who have seen me before know that we are in the process of working on that. Through a grant from the state, $38,000 MVP action grant to develop that plan, where we're coming up with strategies across multiple sectors in town to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as better prepare the town for climate impacts and be more resilient. And again, just to set the stage for why this matters so much for the town of Sherborn, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions coming from the town, an actual slight majority, 51%, are coming from buildings, and primarily 41.6% coming from residential buildings. So we know that in order to tackle this big carbon problem that we have, to really reach these targets that both Sherborn and the state and our country have set forward, we're going to really need to tackle this emissions and efficiency in our buildings. And there's all these co-benefits that come with it, like reduced costs over time, more stability in our utility costs, better comfort, indoor air quality, etc. So with that, we are, I've already mentioned a little bit of this, but Sherborn has already been working on this for some time, having become a green community in 2012. And as part of that, had already adopted the stretch code. So all the green communities, as part of their process of becoming a green community, adopted the stretch energy code. We're going to hear a lot more about that coming up in our panel. And for all green communities, including Sherborn, the updated stretch code that just was released is automatically taking effect. And we're going to hear a little bit more detail about what that looks like, as well as this municipal opt-in specialized code. And John's going to tell us all the details, all the nitty-gritty that you could ever want to hear about how that works. But that is something that will need to be adopted by each municipality and will be on the docket for Sherborn coming up soon. And I just really like this visual. This is also from the decarbonization roadmap. It really sets the stage for kind of how we all are going to play a role in the future of Massachusetts that as it becomes decarbonized. So we're going to be looking at electrifying our vehicles, relying more on public transit and active transportation, but also really working on decarbonizing our buildings. That's new buildings as well as deep energy retrofits of all of our existing buildings, because we have pretty significant building stock already here in town. And I think that's my last slide. So I am going to hand it off to Brad. I don't think we need to hold the mic, actually.
Okay.
Dorothea handed it to me and I just kind of kept holding on.
If
But
you're like getting poor sound levels from me, then you know,
I'll just
grab the mic.
I'll move it more central.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. All right. And Brad, why don't you start just a quick intro of yourself
Okay,
as well.
sure. Hi everyone, my name is Brad Corralius. I'm a elected member of the Sherborn Energy and Sustainability Committee. I moved to Sherborn in June of 2018. I have two kids at Pine Hill. They're a first grader and a fourth grader. We came from Framingham. I am not a professional when it comes to this type of stuff. I'm just kind of a DIYer. I like this stuff. It's important to me. And I am very data driven. Like my day job is I'm an epidemiologist. And so, you know, I recognize the importance of all of these initiatives as they relate to, you know, ecological health and in turn human health. And so, you know, this initiative is important to me. And also, it's something that, you know, relatedly, I really needed to do for my own home for a number of other reasons. So I'm just going to take everyone through my own personal journey of home efficiency upgrades and kind of greenifying my home a little bit. All right, so this is my house. It's again, you know, we moved in about 4.5 years ago. I think this picture came from the real estate listing. And so just to give you a bit of a profile to the house, it's a 3,400 square foot colonial. It's over 50 years old. It includes a finished basement. For insulation, it has R13 in the walls. That's just the higher the R value, the more insulated it is, and the more difficult it is for temperature change across that medium. So just to kind of, you know, orient people with that statistic. So, you know, it's the pink fiberglass that's in the walls. For the attic, it had a whole bunch of pink fiberglass, bad insulation on the floor. It's about 10 inches thick. It was a pretty big mess up there. And I'll get into this later, but it was interesting, you know, when I was updating the attic, I was kind of pulling out a lot of that old insulation, and I realized that it's just a perfect habitat for mice. And I discovered, you know, well over 1,000 mouse turds and carcasses and skeletons. So it was a hot mess. There's nothing in the basement, even though it's supposedly a finished basement. There was no insulation in the basement walls. And for windows, original single pane windows with storms, with the exception of we have an addition that does have double pane windows. It had the original oil boiler with baseboard radiators. So that's how the heat was distributed throughout the house. So, you know, a 1968 oil boiler. We had ducted air conditioning. The system was 20 years old, so it was aging. So I recognized all these things, and it had me a bit nervous. I spoke with the former homeowner just to get a sense as to what he was spending on energy, because previously our home was a 1,400 square foot cape in Framingham. And so moving here, this was on my mind that I'm like, okay, it's probably going to cost us quite a bit more to heat and cool this place. So here's the description from the former homeowner. And he told me that during the winter, they would set the thermostat to a daily average of 62 degrees Fahrenheit with offsets at night. There was a fire in the fireplace most nights. They consumed about 1,100 gallons of oil per year to heat it just to 62 degrees. And their annual electricity consumption was about 16,500 kilowatt hours. So I knew that this was not going to fly. Again, I have 2 young girls and I have a wife, and they like the house warm. And so when I heard this was my response. I was mortified. I was really worried, and I was like, all right, I gotta start tackling this issue. And so that was kind of the original impetus. So the first thing I did was I worked on insulation and air sealing upgrades. And this is always going to be your best bang for the buck. It's going to be your fastest return on investment, and it works regardless of what type of heating and cooling system you use. So what I did, again, I moved in June 2018. So just a few months later, I hired a contractor to spray foam the attic rafters with closed cell spray foam. So the interior of the attic, the ceiling and the walls were essentially spray foamed. So it's insulation, but it's also air sealing, so it doesn't allow air exchange with the outside. The contractor was Insulation Done Right. They came highly recommended by, I think, Rogers out of Framingham, which you probably see their truck around, but they don't do spray foam, so they told me to go with this guy, and I was really pleased with them. It was an $8,000 job, but $500 in federal rebate, and he used the product was called GACO One Pass. It has a Green Guard Gold rating for VOCs. VOCs are volatile organic compounds. It's just not good for you. You don't want to breathe them. But this stuff is what they use in schools and hospitals, so that made me feel good too. So here's a picture of kind of the results of that. If we just forward, please. So now here's the attic. You can see the foam up on the ceiling and at the ends. The nice thing about this too is actually it helps with, it brings the entire attic into the conditioned space of the house. So now the attic is pretty much at the same temperature as my second floor. And so if you run ducts through the attic, which a lot of people do, it becomes much more efficient now when you have that conditioned air going through a conditioned space, rather than it having to fight against 110 degree temperatures in the middle of summer when you're running your air conditioning. So that was an added benefit too. So the next thing that I did on this journey was I did some do-it-yourself air sealing and basement insulation, because again, the basement was not insulated at all, but yet it's finished. So someone dropped the ball there. So I installed weather stripping along door thresholds in the basement. I'll have a picture of that too. I spray foamed areas where I detected air infiltration, where you could just feel that cold air rushing in the winter time. And then actually, just up the street from us in Framingham, there's a company that has reclaimed insulation foam panels that you can get for really cheap compared to brand new. And so I ended up going to them. I bought a bunch of reclaimed foam panels, and I've been putting that up against the interior concrete basement foundation walls. So here's just a couple pictures of what I've done. On the left side, you can see the weather stripping. It's just this kind of line of white foam. You just buy it at Home Depot. It's got adhesive on it. You just stick it right on. The door presses up between it and the threshold, and it prevents air from moving through. Now, during the winter time, before I had done this, I just felt cold air rushing into the basement, and the heating system had to fight hard against this. And so these small little solutions that I implemented had a profound impact on how much energy I was using to heat the basement, and the comfort level too. And so on the right side, it's just where I used a can of spray foam to hit another spot of air infiltration where a pipe is kind of leading to the outside. We can advance, please. And so this is, you can see some foil-faced foam panels in my mechanical room. Up on top, I insulated the rim joists and sill plate with more foam and spray foam. And so I'm actually pretty proud of this work because, over the cold snap that we had a few weeks ago, my basement never got below 50 degrees. And we didn't have any burst pipes or anything. And we have a lot of water pipes in the basement. And I do attribute this to a lot of the work that I did. Because our neighborhood, in our neighborhood, we had a lot of neighbors who had some pretty serious damage. But by hitting all of these spots of air infiltration and insulating the basement, again, it kind of equilibrated to that ground temperature in the area, 50 degrees, and I saw that on the thermostat, so that was really cool to see. So the next major retrofit I did was I stopped using our old oil boiler and I installed air source heat pumps to heat and cool the entire home. And so this was done in March 2019, so a little bit after the insulation work, the spray foam work, but still very early in the process. And so this system was sized to meet the heating and cooling demands of the home. And what it entailed was 2 Mitsubishi Hyperheat multi-zone heat pumps. So these two heat pumps that sat on the outside of the house, and they would each feed to 3 indoor air handlers, mini air handlers that would sit on your wall. And those would spit out the conditioned air, whether it was hot air or cold air. And so the combined heating capacity of these heat pumps was 57,000 BTUs at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So that I did have my house evaluated to check what it needed under that design temperature. And so it did meet that demand. It allowed me to get this $8,000 in rebates from Massachusetts because they were sized to meet the entire heating load of the house at that low temperature. And the installer was Tom Fricker out of Franklin. He was great. We had to adjust the system a little bit, and he worked. He was very receptive to my asks there, and so I was really pleased working with him in the long run. And so it was 28 grand for the system. And then you subtract out the 8 grand in rebates. I financed the rest with a 0% loan through the Mass Heat Loan Program. And so here's a picture of one of those indoor air handlers. I call them heads. So this one puts out 15,000 BTUs at capacity. And this is in the living room. He's the big guy because you match it to the space that they need to condition. And if we want to advance, please. So the previous slide, that was on the first floor. This is also on the first floor of my house. Now we have a 12,000 BTU unit. This is in the den that faces out to the backyard. And something that I wanted to call out here was that I ended up putting in a reversible ceiling fan, which really helped with, I felt, comfort and efficiency. Because with our older homes, again, my home's over 50 years old. You're gonna have a little bit of unevenness with heating, based on the windows not being super efficient or the walls. But partnering this ceiling fan with that air source heat pump air handler turned out to be a really great pairing. And I've been really pleased with it. So when I do my energy coaching, I oftentimes recommend this kind of pairing. So a little bit more on the air source heat pump system. I'm just showing a couple pieces of equipment here. You see, I'm gonna have to point. But right here is one of the 2 multi-zone heat pumps that's pulling heat from outside or during heating mode, or it's dumping heat from the house outside during cooling mode, and then it's sending that via these small little copper refrigerant lines into those ductless air handlers. And so you can see the lines right here. This is actually line hide. It's hiding those refrigerant lines, and then they just get sent to different parts of the house where it connects in with those air handlers. And then there's just a couple pieces of the solar array that I have here too. Like there's a solar meter, and then there's the DC to AC inverter. But something I wanted to point out real quick too is with that line height is you can paint it. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but like you can hide it pretty well. Okay. And so here's, I ended up putting a energy monitor on the circuits for my heat pumps just to see, how their consumption was in the early stages when I just wanted to see how it was performing. And again, I have two heat pumps. I call one the north heat pump and the other the south heat pump. The north heat pump is in blue, the south one's in green. And I just tracked the consumption throughout the year. This was in 2021. And so the north heat pump, because it's feeding the first floor and the basement heads, it does the bulk of the work during the heating season. But then in the cooling season, it switches. And the south heat pump that's feeding the three second floor heads does more of the work. And so over the course of the whole year, I consumed about 10,000 kilowatt hours. And at the time, my energy costs were 23 cents per kilowatt hour. That was all in. That was distribution and supply. And so it comes out to be about $2,300 that I spent to heat and cool my house for 2021. And if we advance, please. So I did the same thing for 2022. Pretty much came out to be the exact same, which was interesting. Just a touch more. But again, this was back when electricity prices were a little bit better. So again, about $2,300 to heat and cool my house for the whole year. And so finally, the last step was doing the solar on the roof. So this was done in September 2019. I installed as big of a system as I could on the back roof, because it is an economy of scales type of situation where it gets cheaper per kilowatt with the more panels that you install, and you do want to size it to meet your entire home's load. This wasn't enough to meet my whole home's load, but it's all the space that I had, so this is what I did. So this was done by Great Sky Solar out of Arlington. It was 40 panels made by Solaria. I give some model numbers here. The inverter is a Solar Edge inverter. It's common. The price was about 39 grand, but then you subtract out the 30% federal tax credit rebate, and that knocks it down a decent amount. I financed the rest with a 6% interest 10-year solar loan. On top of that, the incentives include, I got in early in the smart incentive system, so I was block 2, which means for every kilowatt hour my solar panels produced, I got back from the state about 13 cents. So you multiply that, they make a good amount. So you crunch the numbers, and it ends up being a nice paycheck. And then of course there's net metering too, which means that every single kilowatt hour that your panels produce gets credited towards you. Even if you're not actively using it, it's still going to get credited. And so it's not going away. All right, so here's a picture of the back roof. Again, I filled it as much as I could. I guess I could have gone down a little bit more on the left side of the main roof, but the shading started to get not so good there. And actually, the reason why I like this picture too is because if you look at the chimney, on the left side, there's two flues that are going up. On the left side is where the old oil boiler used to exhaust out, and you can see all that black there. And so that kind of made me feel bad too. When I first moved in, I was like, oh my God, I'm sending all that out into the air. And so, every time I would turn on the heater, I was running the hot water, I was like, yeah, there's more soot going out. And so now there's none of that, which is, makes me feel good.
I can see how clean and pristine the sky is behind it.
That's right, yeah.
Those trees love it.
And so this is just a production graph for the solar array over the last number of years since it got installed. 2020 was the first year I had a full year of data. So, down at the bottom here, I'm just providing you with some statistics on how much production I produced. Very consistent as well, actually. So in 2020, 14,500 kilowatt hours, 2021, 14,000 kilowatt hours, 2022, which was very sunny, as we all know, drought year, was 15,200 kilowatt hours. And so this is kind of my last big slide. And this is where I kind of crunch numbers to understand, had I kept my old system in place, what would I be spending in energy? And under the new system, what am I spending? And so Dorothea, one of our sustainability coordinators, had me do this, and I hadn't done it before. When I did crunch these numbers, it blew my mind. It was pretty crazy. And so a lot of these prices, like for example, oil, I took from reputable sources. Like if we advance a little bullet there, yeah, like Massachusetts has updated prices on oil, and so so I pulled these statistics based on mid 2022 rates. Oil was going at a little over $5 a gallon. Again, the former homeowner said that they were using 1,100 gallons. I scaled that up to about 1,400 gallons just because they were a family of two that was only heating their house to 62 degrees. We wanted it at 70. So this is probably a very conservative underestimate of what we would actually be using for oil. But anyways, so it was $5 for oil, 23 cents for grid electricity. I used their 16,500 kilowatt hours. I crunched the numbers. I would be spending 11 grand per year under the old system. Under the new system, I consumed about 15,000 kilowatt hours of grid electricity. The rest I covered with my solar production. That's a 3-year average. If we advance a few buttons, it'll couple bubbles will pop up. Yeah, that's good. Perfect. And so that 15,000 kilowatt hours of grid electricity, that's what I consumed in 2021. So again, that's at 23 cents per kilowatt hour. The solar production's a 3-year average. And then I have my smart payout, which you noted on the previous slide, where I'm getting about 13 cents per kilowatt hour from my solar panel production. So you crunch those numbers, and I end up spending $1,600 per year. So it's $11,000 per year versus $1,600 per year. And this energy is 100% clean because I ended up sourcing my electricity production from Clearview Energy and getting their hydro source. So that was kind of cool too. So now I've mostly offset my carbon, and I'm saving a ton of money. Now, even when you factor in the cost of those loans, the heat loan and the solar loan, I'm still paying less than I would have under the old system. Again, the old system was 11 grand. Even building in those loans and adding it to the energy cost, I'm still at $8,600. So I'm still coming out, I don't know, $2,500 less with the loans. And then those eventually will go away too. So I just repeated this slide for, if we just advance one more. This is just now with the 2023 rates.
Oops, I'm sorry.
And yeah, this is my last slide. And so I just wanted to update these numbers to see, okay, now that energy's gotten more expensive, oil's actually gone down a little bit. It went from $5.22 down to $5. And then grid electricity, it went from 23 cents up to 36 cents. And the way I got it to 36 cents was, I'm using Eversource now as my supply, but then I ended up signing up for community solar, which knocked 10% off of the rate. And so, I crunched those numbers. The old system, it would be 13 grand per year. The new system, it's $3,600 per year. And then I factor in the loans, and I'm still coming out, again, more than 2 grand below the old system. And again, the loans will be going away pretty soon. So that's my path. I've massively offset my carbon. I've made the house more comfortable, and I've saved money in the process. So it's kind of cool.
It's a great story. Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, Brett, for that.
And we are going to allow time for questions, but I think we're going to wait until all 3 panelists go, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If that works for everybody. And I know trying to monitor some chat as well.
One chat question came up, but you answered it, what the cost was approximately before you moved in.
So next up, we've got Keith Lewis. And Keith, before you jump into your presentation, want to just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I am certified passive house builder. I have been in the green construction world for a little over a decade now. I got into it because I have a deep appreciation for restoration, and my first introduction was doing retrofits in a restoration project in Lowell, Massachusetts, which was at the time the oldest LEED Platinum certified building in the country. That was my introduction to green building, and then I've since continued to pursue that, and with the aim of building better. That has been my goal since I started over 26 years ago building. I did a couple of restoration retrofits, one on the Concord Scout House in Concord, Massachusetts, and the UTEC, now it's the UTEC Youth Center in Lowell. I've since gone on to become a certified passive house builder, which is the most stringent energy code in existence. So I've been engaged in that again, passive house for about 6 years that I've been applying these standards, and I applied it to my own house as well. It is not a certified passive house. We don't need to go into that, but I'm applying all of these principles and standards for several reasons. One, the experience of the clients that I've been building these for and the reports that I get from people is that it is a healthier, better experience. And now I live in one, and I can confirm that that is my experience as well. The health outcomes overall, which I can't put on a spreadsheet for you, they're hard to articulate. However, the experience is, less trips to the doctor, less health issues. My kids are healthier. They miss less school. I miss less work. So I really am speaking to you all, and really, I'm advocating for this because I feel it's not only better for the planet and my children coming up and leaving them a better place or trying to leave them a better place than what I started with, but I truly recognize and value the health outcomes that comes from putting these buildings together. Yes. So, if you will, I'm a construction manager for Adams Beasley Associates, and I only build net zero passive house projects today. So some of you may have been driving by this house the entire time that I've been doing this. I've been doing this work myself, and I've been doing it in stages because I definitely don't have the budget that my clients do. However, I have the knowledge. So I moved here with my wife in 2015, and this is the house that we purchased on Farm Road. And you might not have known it was there because you couldn't see it from the road. It was blocked by a bunch of trees. So right away in 2015, I knew to engage with Mass Save. So
Sorry, Keith.
So I reached out to Mass Save because I knew that they had incentives for increasing your efficiency. This house, 1951, it had no insulation in the walls, had the original hot water heater, had a heating system, forced hot air that had been upgraded in 1990. So at the time that was, now over 25 years old as well. And so, when they came and did the evaluation, we recognized that I needed air sealing, I needed insulation, that I needed to upgrade my systems. And they looked at my heating system and said, well, it's an oil burning at 80% efficiency. That's pretty good. Well, for every 100 gallons of fuel oil that you buy at 80% efficiency, it's like taking 20 gallons and just dumping it down the drain. So the heating system's only burning 80% of that fuel for actual heat, and 20% is just going up the flue and dirtying up your chimney as it comes out the other side. So right away they come down. The number one, I'm repeating what Brad said, the first thing that you can do, and the most cost effective, is to air seal. Fill the gaps, add weather stripping around your doors, windows, and that's exactly what we did. It was short money, it didn't really cost a whole lot. At the time when we bought the home, it only had an electric range anyway that half the burners didn't work and we had to replace. At the time, I wanted to cook with gas because I've always thought cooking with gas was better, but I didn't have that option. So I got an induction, which is something that I strongly recommend. Now that I have one, I will never go back. It's extremely efficient. I've saved a lot of money in my electricity and I can boil my hot water for tea in a minute. It's amazing. Until I owned one, you couldn't have convinced me otherwise. So Mass Save came out, we did the audit, filled out the paperwork, was able to get a company to come in, and if you advance to the next slide, this is another example of air sealing around wire penetrations, and the whole perimeter of the basement was exposed so we could get at it. Next. So this is not my house, but this is an example of how they do a blown-in insulation retrofit. They'll remove pieces of siding, they will drill holes in several locations in a stud bay in between the studs. They use a tube and they will inject cellulose, newspaper, recycled newspaper cardboard into your wall cavities. And it's a great insulation, it's a recycled product, it's fairly inexpensive. With the rebates, they covered 75% of the cost. So to insulate my entire house that had none, the bill came to like $7,800. We paid $1,800 out of the whole thing. That was advanced to the next
Sorry.
slide. That's right.
I'm so fascinated. I stopped.
With the original single pane windows, I knew I was going to have to replace those. But even at the time, just blowing in the insulation, I didn't have the budget and I didn't have the money to replace my windows or do all this work you're going to see next at the time. Just the insulation alone and the air sealing, it dropped my oil bill by 60% right off the bat. So my heating bill was astronomical for a 1,500 square foot cape. Oil burning with zero insulation. I was definitely filling my tank much more than you were. So that decrease in cost was immediate, and even the experience in the space was also immediate. So then a little bit later on, we saved up some money. Me being a professional builder, I knew that I didn't want to just put replacement windows in the openings of the old windows. I wanted new construction windows. So that meant I was going to have to strip away about 40% of the siding on my house anyway. So that was an opportunity. Go ahead and strip the rest of it. I also needed a new roof. It was growing moss on it, which looked kind of cool if you're into living roofs, but that's not really how it's supposed to work. So I knew I was going to have to do a complete renovation of the exterior. So I saw that as an opportunity to really apply these passive house standards and make this home truly as efficient as a 1951 Cape can be. So I did this alone, so it took a long time. You may have been driving by. I'm sure I might have waved at a couple of you. This is a vapor open membrane. This is a special membrane that's been designed in Germany, and they've been using it since the 90s. This makes an airtight home, but if there's any excessive moisture inside the wall cavity, it will allow that moisture out. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but it works sort of like your Gore-Tex jacket. When there's excessive heat and moisture, it will open up and will allow that excessive moisture out. But when it's really cold out, it actually tightens right up, creates a very nice air seal, and stops that transfer of energy. So I completely stripped out, even cut the overhangs off. And when wrapping this building, you want to make a continuous connection, roof to walls, walls to foundation. So it's really important to make that connection at the foundation, and there's some primers and some tapes that will stick to concrete. So little by little, I wrapped this building, I tightened it up, and then proceeded to put in the windows. Thanks. After tightening up the building, wrapping it, taping it, all penetrations, every wire that sticks out, every pipe gets a gasket, gets foam around it, you make this building as tight as possible, because the quickest way to lose heat is through gaps. This is the equipment that we use to test our buildings for their air tightness. I wish I had some of the stats. Like Brad did a great job collecting his data. I didn't because I was really focused on the work. My building was certainly leaking. It was probably leaking the heated space, I don't know, 12 times in the matter of an hour. So my heat ran constantly in the winter. This is the equipment we use to test it. You set it up in a doorway. It intentionally sucks all the air out of your house, and then it measures the air going across that fan at a certain rate, and will tell you how much leakage there is in your house and how many times the heating system has to condition the air in that space before it leaks out the building again. So heat moves. We all know that heat rises, right? That's pretty common knowledge amongst everyone. But the reality is heat moves in all directions. Yes, warm air rises, but it radiates, and through convection, it's constantly moving through your space. So we're dealing with the convection, conduction, radiation in many different ways throughout our building. So like if you think about the chair you're sitting in right now, if you were to get up and go outside and come back and sit down, the chair would seem warm to you. That's because you're radiating your body heat into that material. So the exact same thing is happening in our buildings. It's our conditioned space is warming up the drywall and the 2x4s and the sheathing and the siding. And just like a battery will pull positive energy out of it to operate, our buildings are pulling that heat right through the material and out into the cold space. Heat always moves to cold. That is just a scientific fact, and it moves in all directions. So stack effect. For you that have wood stoves, you understand that you light the fire, the smoke goes up the chimney, but it's got to bring air from somewhere else, right? So it's pulling it through the vent and pulling the air from the space so that it can allow that smoke to go up the chimney. Well, your building works in the exact same way. You're conditioning the space. We're inside of it. We're 98.6 degrees. We're creating heat. We're cooking. We're creating all this warm air, which rises. And if you think of your building like a big chimney, that air is rising up through your space and out through your attic and through the vents and all the leaks. And it's pulling cool air from somewhere else. So all the cracks in your foundation, if you got gaps around your pipes that might be coming up through the basement floor, or you have a hose bib that goes out for washing your car, it's pulling that cold air through all those gaps and bringing it into the building. So now your heating system has to condition that air again, and then it sends it right back up. So it's a constant chimney effect that's happening through your house. So we use this term thermal bridging, which is in the passive house world, our buildings, we aim to make them thermal bridge free. So what that means is that we're actually creating a break from that energy being pulled through your 2x4s and your flooring joists and your rafters out into the cold environment. And there's a couple methods of how we actually do that. If you're remodeling your home, there's really one kind of go-to technique, which you're going to see in the next slide. But before you go, this is just to clarify. Your space inside is 70 degrees, and let's say, I don't know, it's 20 degrees outside. That drywall is heating up, it's transferring it to the 2x6, it's transferring it to the plywood, which is transferring it to the all solid materials that are pulling that energy through the building. If you go to your next slide, please. So this is a picture of a code-built house prior to 2020. My friend John Hyde's going to talk a little bit more about the code portion of this after. So this was actually a well-built house. It's well insulated. We really don't see any gaps in the cavities. But in the cavities, you're getting an R value. And at that time, it was around R28. If I really haven't paid attention to the codes, the building codes, because I build passive house, which far exceeds the codes. So I really no longer pay attention to whatever the current code is, because I'm building to a different standard. But you can see through this thermal image, these are all the 2x4s, the floor joists, the rim joists, the rafters. All of those are a thermal bridge. and they equate to R7. You get about R1 per inch with wood. So about 25% of your building is solid wood, maybe a little bit more. So you may have R28 or R30 in your wall cavities, but 25% of your building is only R7. So a lot of energy is being lost through that solid framing material. So back to my house again. So what we're doing is creating a thermal break. Foam does not conduct the heat transfer. That is an R12 sheet good, foil face sheet good. It's just like your favorite cold beverage you get from Dunkin' Donuts, iced coffee. A lot of people ask, can I have a styrofoam cup? They put it in a styrofoam cup. Now it breaks that warm summer temperature from touching the cup and creating the rings and sweating and condensation. That's what's happening in our walls. When you have an extreme transfer from warm air to cold air, there's condensation when that warm air hits a cold surface. So similar to your favorite adult beverage that you might take out of the fridge and go out onto your picnic table, cold can of beer sitting on the picnic table on an 85-degree day, within a few minutes it turns to condensation. That's the relative humidity in the air that's condensing when it hits something cold. So that is also happening inside our walls. If you could look with a microscope or had x-ray vision, if you have an uninsulated wall and it's negative 12 degrees out, like it was 2 weeks ago, the warm, humid air going through your wall cavity and hitting the sheathing is turning to frost on the inside of your wall. And eventually that melts and it goes somewhere. And wet wood creates mold. So this is where we start to think about these health outcomes of building to a passive house standard or to a net zero standard and making these interruptions in the thermal break. The roof is completely covered. The walls, it's 100% continuous. I wrap this whole thing in a sweater and tape up all the seams. What you see in those wood slats that are moving up, that's a vent space. So I can actually vent my roof. There's another layer of plywood that's going to go over that, and then just your conventional roofing system. When the sun is baking down on that roof, and I've clocked temperatures of 146 degrees on a summer day on your roof surface, that's radiant heat, now heating up your attic space or your bedrooms in this little cape. So now you're actually taking on heat from the outside. That's just radiating through your roof, unless you create this thermal break and vent space. Move to the next slide. So I put in new construction windows because I knew that there was no insulation in the walls. So it wouldn't do me much good to just put a replacement window in my existing window frame. So I decided to take the windows out and put new construction windows in because I can tape those up and seal them much better to my building assembly than I can with replacement windows. So the entire building's now been wrapped. That's just conventional tar paper on top of my second layer of sheathing. I don't have to use anything fancy. Tar paper is an awesome product we've been using for forever. So all the seams get taped on all the foam, give myself a second shot at air sealing everything. And then I just went ahead and put a natural roof on. Now, your sidewalls, similarly, this is called a vented rain screen that we've created. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but this is the most common. These vertical straps are the nailer for my siding, and what you can't see behind this little trim board on the bottom is I actually have vent strips. So air can actually flow up behind my siding, and it goes all the way up into my vented soffit, and then all those wood strips you saw on the roof is creating a vent that allows it to go right up through convection. The warm air just naturally follows that path right out the top of the house. So now when it's 140 degrees baking down on my roof, because I have that little airspace, you can measure that temperature at around, 85. So it's cooling it at the surface before it heats up my building and creates uncomfortable conditions in the attic space. Once I sealed it all up, after working all day, my dirty socks, that smell lingers because now my building's really airtight. So I got to bring a mechanical system to give me good, fresh air exchange. This is a unit I was able to integrate into my existing HVAC system because I already had the ductwork there. So this runs constantly to bring fresh air in from the outside, and it's using the return system to send out spent air. And what happens inside this little machine is it has a coil, just like the radiator in your car helps to cool off the engine. There's a coil inside of it that the warm air that's going to be sent out my building is heating up that coil, and it's just transferring the heat. It's not mixing the air. And the cool air that's being pulled in from outside that's bringing in fresh air is going across that coil, and it's picking up that heat energy from the air that's going out. So now I'm preheating that 20-degree air that's outside to maybe now it's about 64 degrees by the time it passes that coil. And my heating system only has to work just a little bit just to bring it up to the temperature I want it. So I'm not just blasting my house with like 15, 20-degree air as I'm bringing fresh air into my house. There are filters in this that are already filtering for the first time the pollen and the dust that's out in the air before it enters my HVAC system. Next slide, please. This is a diagram of exactly how that works. You can see the fresh air from the outside coming in at the top, comes across that coil at the same time that the warm air from in the house is going out and transfers that heat to the cool air coming in. Slide, please. Ooh, well, slight fail on that slide. My fault. This is my new heat pump system, which I could just integrate right into my HVAC system because it already existed. I like this because it's a whole house heat pump, and I don't need the cassettes that, or the heads that Brad was describing earlier in the different spaces in my house. This also has a very high MERV rating, which is a high filtering system. So I've already started the filtered air from outside through my ERV, which stands for Energy Recovery Ventilation. Their HRV is Heat Recovery Ventilation. They both do the same thing. The only difference is an ERV will also transfer moisture, where a heat recovery ventilator only transfers heat. But that's beside the point. So now I'm filtering the air in my house a second time with a much more dense filtration system. It cuts down on the dust, and for somebody that used to get sinus infections twice a year annually, I haven't had one since I put this system in. And that's just my personal health outcomes. I know this is true for others who have also had skin irritations. The materials in our house, through expansion and contraction, when that heat's being pulled out, when you don't have a thermal break, you don't have a good controlled environment, it's the expansion and contraction of these materials that rub up against each other and create dust. That's why we have dust all over our furniture. It's the drywall and the studs and the plywood and our floors that are swelling up when they're overheated and humid, and then they shrink when it's super dry in the house. That's what's creating the dust. Essentially, we're eating our homes. We're inhaling our homes. So the work that I do, I think very carefully about the materials that I use when I'm building these houses. I like recycled newspaper and cardboard as opposed to some of the other insulations that exist out there, because I know my body can actually handle that if I'm taking it in. I think about VOC content of paints and stains, because these are off-gassing all the time, and we're taking it in. So we think very carefully about that as well for better health outcomes. One thing just as a little side note, pay attention to the furniture you buy. A lot of that stuff is actually really toxic and is putting harmful chemicals. Glade, potpourri, they smell great. Some issues.
Bringing that mic towards the other mic. No?
Okay. So, and Brad had shared, these are your condensers that live on the outside with your heat pump system. This is similar to the heads that Brad has in his house. It's great for retrofitting a home. If you've got radiant, old boiler, radiant finned heat, this is a solution for supplementing or replacing, where you don't need to add ductwork. This is the house today. If you drive down Farm Road, take a look over, you'll see my Adams and Beasley Associates truck parked out in front. And, you know, I didn't change the look of it because I really love my little Cape. We are going to be adding an addition coming up soon that will be built to the Passive House standard. And my next steps, as my budget will allow, is I do intend to add solar. And the only reason we didn't do that is knowing we had another phase. We had another addition that was going to come up, and I needed to be able to calculate how much more energy I'm going to need to put into that building and how many more light fixtures and so on and so forth. I wanted to wait so that I could get the full big picture and size my system appropriately. And eventually my house will be net zero. It isn't yet, but I've been taking all the proper steps to get me there. Next, I do need to insulate my basement, much like Brad. I just haven't had the opportunity, but will be in the next phase. So that'll be the next big step, adding the solar to the back once the addition is complete. Should be one more. And the other part is that I don't have insulated ductwork. I'm going to insulate my ductwork. My system will have to work less hard to get the conditioned air to the space that I need it. That pretty much wraps up at least this particular project, and hopefully gave you a good baseline on what some of these upgrades mean. And the other part that I would recommend, because I didn't get a chance to mention it, is that I will be hiring an energy consultant when I do my addition. I know how to do all of this work, but what they're going to do is help me to make sure that I've sized my system right. They have a much better understanding of all of the rebates. Plus, I want a third party that's going to verify all of these conditions once it's finished so that I can get those rebates. And for those of you who might be doing a remodeling project, I would highly recommend hiring these consultants because they are a third party verifier. If you're hiring a contractor, you don't want to necessarily just take the contractor's word for it. This person is going to advocate for you and come and do the inspections necessary to make sure it's done right and they haven't missed anything. Because it is important. The tighter that we make the buildings, you have to know what you're doing because there is some risk that if it isn't done properly, that it can cause other issues that unintentionally. Will be some questions at the end for those of you who are interested.
Thank you so much, Keith. And I was just going to add on the note about your, I was going to say go behind. The tackling your solar panels later. It's actually very smart to do as much efficiency tightening up as possible first, because you may lower your load enough that you don't need as much in the way of your solar energy and end up reducing those upfront costs as well. So really smart approach, actually. All right, John, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself before you jump into all things code?
So, John Hyde, I live here in Sherborn, and moved in 2011, much like Keith and Brad. We renovated our house, a little bit of a hybrid between the two approaches, but we're running low on time, so I won't get into that. So I'm a senior sustainability manager for a commercial construction company here in Massachusetts. And I focus a lot on building electrification, decarbonization of buildings, looking at embodied carbon. And I'm also a certified passive house builder. And, you know, I love the trails here in Sherborn. I love Farm Pond. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, I guess you could say, and also with 3 kids. So, you know, solving these problems is important to me and a reason why I do a lot of the work that I do. So I am going to preface this presentation with I'm not an expert in codes. I'm a builder. So I'm just, you know, I've been digging into the codes a little bit because they're affecting our work, and there are a lot of people in the state, architects, engineers, Building inspectors, a lot of people are trying to get caught up on these codes because there are a lot of changes and they're a lot more complicated than the old version of the stretch code. So actually, if you can go to the next slide. So just give you a quick background on the stretch energy code, and then we'll dig into the stretch code, the specialized opt-in code, and then just give you some resources if you want to go try to find more information about any of these codes. There's a lot of great information out there. So real quick, I got to give credit to the DOER. They're the ones that have been putting a lot, these presentations out to a lot of these communities who are trying to adopt the stretch code for the first time or adopt the specialized code. I also work with the BSA Committee on the Environment. That's a group of architects and engineers who address different topics. I'm new this year to that board, and so they've done presentations on this, and so I'm using a little bit of their work. And also NEEP put together a little FAQ section at the end, which we may not get to, but there's links to all the stuff if you want to check it out. Just some high-level recaps of the different code changes. Okay. So these recent code upgrades are a result of former Governor Baker's the Climate Action Plan, which sets a mandate to reduce carbon emissions in Massachusetts to 0 in 2050. So buildings represent 39% of the emissions here in the state. So obviously a big target. We've got to address them. So next slide. So new buildings are easy. We just talked about 2 retrofits, a lot of work, a lot of planning, logistics. You're living in these buildings. There's different, they don't always pay off. But a new building is pretty easy. It's a no-brainer. Any new building, with the mass save incentives out there that cover all the additional soft cost, builders across the state fully understanding the benefits of building, and then people aren't scared of this stuff anymore. They know how to do it. The trades are now familiar. So basically any new building built after 2023, if you add up the square footage, it's estimated to represent about 27% of the built square footage in 2050. So if we can eliminate the emissions from these buildings, we're going to have 27% of our building stock will essentially have 0 emissions. So there's a base code. So there's a base code, there's a stretch code, and there's a specialized code. We are a stretch code community here in Sherborn. But did you say it was 2012 or 8? I can't remember.
Well,
2012. So the town voted in 2012 to adopt the stretch energy code, which we did. And as part of adopting that, we'll voluntarily have to adopt any other updates to that stretch code. The newest one came out and became in effect January 1 for residential, and it'll apply to commercial buildings in July. We have not adopted the specialized code in Sherborn. Brookline is the first to pass it, and Watertown is as well, and then Cambridge and Somerville. So 4 communities here have already opted into the specialized code. This is just a quick map. So you can see pretty much, there's like 300 communities that are stretch, and there's a few that are still in the base, and 4 now that are in the specialized, and several others that are in line right now to vote on the specialized opt-in.
I think I saw something like 30 or so are planning to vote on it pretty soon.
Yeah. So we can zip past this one. So there's 2 parts. There's residential, which obviously is going to be, most relevant to Sherborn. There's also commercial, which I'll touch on briefly. We do have some municipal and commercial buildings, so I'll just touch on those lightly at the end. So, I think you hear the theme here after their presentations. It's all minimizing loads, energy loads, right? So you do that with air sealing and insulation. Once you bring down the loads, you can then replace your mechanical equipment with electrical equipment. So basically, electrical heating demand is the highest energy demand in Massachusetts. So if you have a tight building, it's well insulated, you can efficiently heat and cool it with electrical equipment, heat pumps, and ERVs. And then you can put solar on your roof to to provide clean, renewable energy for your HVAC. So exterior enclosure. It's like a windbreaker insulation. It's like a fleece underneath. You put those two together, you stay nice and warm in the middle of the winter. And same theory applies to the house. So we could flip to the next one here. So to Keith's point, Keith's a certified passive house builder. Brad's a advanced DIYer, and he likes to dig into the data and the research. So the code is, it's going to emphasize performance, and you need somebody that knows what they're doing. A consultant of some type, a HERS rater, certified passive house consultant. You want somebody that's going to do a double check because it's simple in concept, air seal, insulate, electrify, and add renewables. That's sort of the 4 easy steps. But there's a lot of details. Keith was pointing out details of his rain screen, and your weather resistive barrier. Where's the dew point in the wall? Is it going to be in the middle? Where's it going to be? So you want to try to study all that stuff to make sure that you are in fact getting a healthier building and not doing the opposite. So get a consultant. There's incentives out there for consultants. There's aggressive incentives that are offered by MassSave to knock down all those soft costs and so that you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And then go back one slide. So I just want to see that those they were both talking about air sealing. So if you have a small little hole in your envelope, with that stack effect that Keith was talking about, the bigger the stack effect, you got more pressure on that little hole, so it just draws even more air up through. So a blower door test is easy, even if you're not getting a rating, just to find where your leaks are so you can seal those up. All right, you can flip to the next one. Okay, so you'll hear a lot about HERS ratings in the building code. And so it stands for Home Energy Rating System. And so all that is somebody that looks at your house, your walls, your mechanical equipment, looks for thermal bridges, air barriers, insulation, windows, doors, all that kind of stuff, and they give your home a rating. And it's all based on, I think, a 2006 code home. And so they compare you to that. So that is 100 is the standard home, and if you're 49, you're 51% better than that standard. So it's just kind of a relative performance. All right, so the base code's being rolled out, and the base code isn't going to be in effect until 2024. The stretch code is in effect right now. So just give you some similarities, although since we're already a stretch code, we really need to focus on the stretch code stuff. But so EV wiring, no change there. Solar ready, no change there. Same as the base code. So there's no premiums for any of this stuff for the stretch code because it's already required. They do away with the Energy Star and the prescriptive code. For the in the stretch code, you can either build to a passive house standard. That's what Keith was talking about, and an ERV is required. Well, heat or energy recovery is required. So that's an ERV or an HRV. And then in New England, because of our cold winters, we typically use ERVs, so you can transfer the humidity from your outgoing air to your incoming air. So you transfer energy, so heat and humidity. And if cold air in the wintertime, you don't want to bring in super cold air from outside with low RH and heat it up, because then it gets even drier. So it requires typically an ERV in Massachusetts. And another big change is that it does apply to alterations, additions, and renovations, whereas it did not in the old version. Okay. Real quick, I'm going to just kind of buzz past this one, but basically this just gives you different HERS ratings, and you can see that the HERS ratings are going to be ramped, down. They're going to be more strict. So the lower the number, the more strict the HERS rating is. And so as we get out to July, it's going to drop even further. Okay. So again, pretty much the same thing. If you're going to be doing additions, it's not, people are going to try to play games with the square footage, but it's basically conditioned floor area. So if you do 500 feet here and 400 feet there, that's 900 feet, and you're still under the 1,000. But if you do 550 on one side of your house, 550 on the other, that's going to be 1,100 feet of conditioned area. So just be careful. Take a look at the existing conditioned floor area, and you have to do some calculations to see what applies to you. Okay, so as I mentioned, this code is in effect right now. New construction, you can have a tighter HERS rating. You can see there it's dropped a little bit. Energy Star is gone. You need the ERV and you need EV wiring. So we can skip this one. It's kind of a recap. Okay, so, and again, Keith kind of hit this one on the right a little bit. So if you have an all electric home, you're basically gonna have to have a heat pump and some sort of like heat pump water heater. Your domestic water, you want to have an electric heat pump water heater. You're gonna have better air sealing. And if it's a gas home, you're gonna have to bump up the triple glazed windows and beef up your insulation and do a little bit of air sealing. So Sherborn, obviously a very limited gas supply. Most of the houses around here are on oil. So if anybody's building a new house, it's almost a no-brainer to go all electric at this point. It's okay. You can go to the next one here. So Mass Save has huge incentives, and now there's some IRA money out there as well, and that's the what is it again? The Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, sorry, long day here. So check it out. So this is for new homes. And so those 15,000 and the 25,000, that's for taking care of a lot of like the HERS raters and things like that. Passive house consultant, that'll take care of a lot of those costs. And also, if you're doing a renovation, I don't have the slide up here, but there are a ton of incentives for insulation. I think it was 75 when I did mine. That's what Keith said his was, and I think now it can go up to 100% in some cases. And there's incentives for heat pumps. And, heat pumps come in all sorts of sizes and configurations. You can have the wall cassettes like Brad had. You can have the central ones that Keith have. There are cabinet heaters. There's ones that go in the ceiling. Some of them, you can duct them, if you want. Or you can just have them on the wall. You can have them on the floor. So there's plenty of options out there, depending on your style and whatnot. So you can come up with something that looks pretty good generally for your house and get an incentive for it. This is just an example that from the DOER, and with incentives, you can see that a house built to meet the stretch code is $20,000 less than the code built house with all the available incentives. They're just throwing a lot of money at this right now, and they've been focusing on residential, and now they're shifting their focus over to commercial. So they've infused the multifamily housing market like crazy. Everything that's going up is basically passive house these days because of all the money that's available. You flip to the next one. And then this is a house that's built with gas, also some incentives and things. But you can see this one is slightly more expensive than the electric house. Part of the reason is if you're going with these mixed fuel scenarios, in some instances, if you're putting in gas, the code's going to also require you to wire the house for future electrification. And it's not only putting in a conduit, it's also putting in the wire and breakers and getting the house ready for electrification in the future. So that's, and especially here in Sherborn where there's no gas, well, there's not a lot of gas. It's just, tipping the scales towards all electric. Okay, you can flip to the next one. Okay. Again, real quick, big changes in the commercial stretch code. It used to apply to buildings over 100,000 feet. Now it's buildings of all sizes, and it includes additions, renovations, and alterations. You can see, carbon emissions come from energy, electricity generation, stuff like that. So you can see there's a big reduction in energy use, dropping it by like 90%. And demand reduction for heating and cooling by air sealing the houses or buildings and insulating them. So by doing that, again, less energy needed to heat and cool these buildings, the more easy it is to heat and cool them with electric systems. Okay. Again, same thing. Keith's presentation nailed this one, so we can just skip right over this one. Again, this relates to the commercial, very similar to, there are alternate compliance pathways in commercial construction that aren't available for residential. Passive house is one of them. There's a HERS there's a There's a HERS, Teddy, passive house, and there are two others that I have written down on another slide, but I forget. But basically, the passive house requirement was the one that I think a lot of people are going to be pursuing, just because it's easy. The Teddy, that's a thermodynamic study of, you take a look at your heating and cooling demands, and you get a Teddy score. And I'm not an expert at all in Teddy, but I've heard that it's pretty aggressive to try to go the Teddy pathway. So most people will probably go with either HERS or passive house.
There's a little more info in that NEAP
Yeah.
FAQ that you referenced.
Yeah, again, this stuff gets really into the nitty gritty. There's a lot of nuance to it, and if you're here and you're going to be building a commercial building, you're definitely going to want to get an engineer that understands this code to take a look at it.
And a lesson in acronyms. A lot of
Yes.
All right. Again, some quick bullets. Additions. Okay. This is just a quick different scenarios that you could come up against and which code you would have to follow. It gets a little tricky. So, an addition which exceeds 100% of the existing building or 20,000 feet. It's basically, they're going to say it's an addition, but we're going to treat it like it's a brand new building. So you're going to have to build according to the stretch code, new construction. Again, alteration. There's, again, some nuances with an alteration. Generally, if you are touching a building in commercial, if you're touching the exterior enclosure, I believe you're going to have to upgrade that enclosure for the area that you're touching. You're not going to have to upgrade the whole building. I think it's a little gray right now. There's some interpretation happening in the residential code, like what triggers a full enclosure upgrade. So I can't really comment on that, but just stay tuned because I think there's some clarifying information coming out on that. Okay. Again, envelope backstop, that has to deal with window to wall ratios. So if you have like a curtain wall system or something like that, it's the amount of glazing on the outside of the building as a ratio to the wall. And if you go over a certain amount, then they basically require you to fully electrify the building. And if you're below, you can take a mixed fuel pathway, meaning go a combination of electric and gas. Again, some nitty gritty that I don't really think applies too much to Sherborn, and it's 8 right now. So let's skip this. We'll skip these next few, I think, here. This is just a quick life cycle analysis. We'll hit this one. Why don't we go to the next slide here? So basically, that team did a study, and they looked at the premium for first cost, and then looked at the life cycle costs. So I think in some instances, without incentives, certain buildings didn't qualify for incentives previously, but with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Mass Save commercial coming out now, I think these first costs are going to actually go down. And then, Brad had a perfect example of his house. Once it's running, your energy use is so much lower that you're going to have operational savings year over year over year. And what that translates to in the climate plan is that there'll be less carbon emissions from all these buildings. So heading towards less carbon floating around the atmosphere. All right, so this is now the specialized opt-in code. So the first is the base code, which we don't worry about really because we follow the stretch code here in Sherborn. Specialized code is a code that would need to be voted on and approved by the town. And so for residential, it applies to new homes over 4,000 feet, and they can either go all electric or zero energy. And again, I think if you're following the conversations, it's not really that hard if you're building a new building to go net zero. If you're doing a commercial, and then the other, so there's a couple other options. Just keep in mind the mixed fuel. They are going to make you wire it for electric. So it kind of discourages the mixed fuel route. All right, next slide. Okay, let's just skip this one, more hers.
Is
This
it
one
worth
too.
mentioning the multifamily developments that will be in the specialized code?
Yeah, yep. So let's go one more, I think, maybe, not that. Yeah, so if you look to the right there, so Keith, were you talking about multifamily, like going passive house or something like that? Yeah. So it depends on the size of the building and the number of stories, which way you would have to go. For the regular stretch code, you're already going to have to go either passive house, Teddy, or hers for multifamily residential. And if you go, let's see, passive house, 5 stories or less, or over 12,000 feet, 6 stories or less, Teddy or hers. Oh yeah, okay. So it changes, right? So there's like a phased approach to the specialized code. There's like a threshold that allows you to choose other pathways, but then in July 2024 it goes to all passive house. So right now it's basically passive house under 12,000 feet, and then in July 2024, after that is it. Well, if that was adopted, then it would be passive house for everything. And there's something like 10,000. There were about 20 passive house units in Massachusetts in 2018, and there's over 10,000 right now certified passive house.
It's crazy how quickly it's selling it.
They're offering rebates per unit with developments that actually make it cheaper to build a 5-story mid-rise residential building than you could build it to code.
Yeah, so you'd be forced in July as of 2024. If you're building a multifamily over 12,000 feet, you would have to build it as a passive house. And then again, other commercial buildings, you have there's 3 different pathways that you could pick, and you could follow any one of those. Schools and offices, a little bit different. Again, more of the same for commercial. We can buzz by this one. So the specialized code, so basically the way that this works is they recommend a 6 to 12 month adoption period. So if a town does vote on the specialized code and the town approves it, basically you're going to wait. It's either going to become effective on January 1 or July 1, and typically you're going to wait at least 6 months. So if you passed it in like May, it would become effective in January of the following year. Okay. These are some decision trees. We don't need to get into these now, but if you can refer back to this. If you are looking at your project, this is just to help you try to figure out which pathway you can follow and where to go look for your information. It's a really helpful slide, but we don't have to get into it here. And this, addition moved. So this is this slide is meant to help you navigate if you are doing an addition, renovation, or change of use. Try to figure out which codes you have to follow. Again, gets really nuanced and tricky, so you could definitely want to talk to either a code consultant or get an architect who's familiar with navigating this. Again, timeline, we've kind of covered this. We can blow past this one. And these are we've kind of hit on this stuff. Some boilerplate stuff, but very clear answers for some typically asked questions in regards to the specialized code and the stretch code. So we can skip these. And why don't we get into, we got about 7 minutes. We could probably run over if we need to, but why don't we get into Q&A if people have those. And a couple other quick notes. Here's a bunch, these resources are great. All right, here's some misconceptions. So the stretch code's been around. It's these, like, Keith's been building passive houses before they were called passive houses, really. And this is nothing new. It's very simple, actually. Again, air sealing, insulation, electric heating, electric HVAC equipment, ventilation, air, and then add solar, and you're good. Net zero, healthy building, no low energy costs. So it's not more expensive. We proved that one wrong. Keith hasn't had a sinus infection, so we know they're healthier.
want that.
They don't require solar PV. Solar PV readiness is a requirement. But again, like I've got a solar system on my house right now, and it's only been on for a little over a year, and it's cranking. So with the paybacks from the SMART program and the incentives that are out there, it's been great. So if you have an existing home, no impact to you. Stretch energy code, specialized code doesn't mean anything. Keep doing what you want. Don't have to take out your gas stove. You don't have to make any changes, right?
No one is coming for your gas stoves.
Real quick, one other thing that we've been talking about is Keith was talking about acronyms. We've got like a heat pump. The beauty of the heat pump, the reason why the heat pump works so well is it uses a refrigeration cycle. Like when Keith was talking about dumping 20 gallons of oil not down the drain, right, Keith? But an oil furnace is about 80% efficient. So 20% of that heat is going up the chimney. If you have a heat pump, you can put 1 unit of energy in, and you get 2.5 units of energy out. So it uses the refrigeration cycle to move heat. So you're not really creating heat by burning a fossil fuel. You're moving heat. Same theory, like when you put a warm 12-pack of seltzer in your fridge, you feel heat pumping out the back. The refrigerator moving the heat from that seltzer outside. So, and if you can get these branch circuit controllers if you have a big house or a building that has multiple heat pumps, and you can basically take the outside of the building, usually needs more heating and cooling than the interior of the building. So you could do this. You can use these things called branch circuit controllers, and you can basically take the heat from this part of the building and you can move it over to the other part of the building. So then your COP goes from 2.5 up to 5. So you're using 1 unit of energy to get 5 out just by moving heat within the building. So you reduce your energy demand by tightening up the envelope and adding the insulation, and then you use electric heat pumps, which are way more efficient to use less energy, and then you can use solar on your house or purchase green renewable energy. And again, backstop of all this stuff is reducing the amount of carbon that's going up into the atmosphere. So that's why it's all happening.
I didn't put the facts out there. I did the blend-in insulation with Mass Save, and it cut my oil bill by almost 60%. I had no insulation. After applying all of these other things that I did, I got rid of the oil and I put in a heat pump, so I have no oil. So I eliminated my oil bill, and my electricity bill went down 40%. In the summertime, when everybody's electric bill goes up because their AC is running constantly, mine actually goes down. My air conditioning barely runs. I might kick it on just to reduce the humidity in the house. So it's that exact, what John just described so well, is really that movement and transfer of energy. When utilizing these heat pumps, they have sensors. They know they can read when it's only 50 degrees outside. The unit itself only has to actually work at about 30% capacity to make up the difference of 50-degree air outside to make it 70-degree air inside. So even, and then it gets colder and colder, well, the unit will actually bump up its capacity. And that's what actually makes them super efficient, is that it doesn't need to go full blast like a furnace is either on or it's off. These actually have the ability to adjust the rate for which they operate just to create the amount of energy that you need.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your personal stories and for the generalizable knowledge about codes. We are going to open it up to questions either through the chat or in the room if folks have questions. So we'll start in the room, I suppose. Yes.
Okay. I thank you very much for I didn't think of how to frame this question just yet. Are there parts of the code or for the work being done on this that'll look at things like what is the embodied energy and the type of insulation that you choose or something like that? Because that's part of the whole life cycle of how much energy we're using for things. And I was just curious because I know the embodied energy on cellulose recycled paper is low. Certainly the blow-in foams are amazing for retrofitting difficult spaces, but there's a lot more energy that goes into producing it. So I was just curious how that fits into this, or we can't worry about that right now. We just got to get.
That's like sort of like the next. That's like the next piece of the puzzle right now. You know, so like again, building a net zero operational carbon building is easy, but Canada's doing some pilot programs on embodied carbon up in Vancouver. They're requiring people to do budgets for their embodied carbon. So like wood is like negative carbon, you know, if it's responsibly sourced, because it sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, stores it in the wood, use it in your building, and then you plant more trees. So there are people getting away from using steel and concrete. You know, cement is very energy intensive. So the code right now does not address that, but Canada's taking a look at it, and there are a lot of people here in Massachusetts looking at it as well. BU's big global computing school or whatever, school of computer science, whatever, their net zero building. They used like a low carbon measure, came up with a low carbon concrete design, so they reduced the carbon footprint of the concrete by like 6%, and which doesn't sound like a ton, and but it all adds up. And there's like hemp wool. People have used hemp wool insulation, wood fiber insulation. Both of those. Hemp wool's nice because it grows outside. It's rapidly renewable. Turn it into insulation. It's soft. People's selling clothes now made out of hemp and stuff like that. It's been around forever. So that's been a product that's like these commercial office buildings use a lot of they'll do acoustical insulation. They'll put like fiberglass acoustical insulation between offices or conference rooms to dampen the sound, and so that's like an easy switch to go to hemp wool. It's like interior insulation. So I think that's like people are pushing beyond this operational carbon stuff and looking at the embodied carbon and deep energy retrofits. That's the other challenge.
So a group called the Carbon Leadership Forum that's doing a lot of work around embodied carbon right now in buildings, and they have a working group actually based here in Mass that are starting to look at it in a lot more detail. There's also a project, mixed use development in Newton, that is one of the buildings in the development. They've actually been trying to address embodied carbon and done full calculation on that. So it's popping up. They couldn't get it into this new code, but it's definitely starting to make an appearance. Other questions?
Before I ask a question, I'll have to make the big pitch that everybody can do a mass save energy audit every 2 years. Okay, and people just have to remember that and keep going out there, because the way you get the incentives, and plus, as everybody said here, you got to reduce the energy use in your house before you do everything else. That is the most cost-effective way of doing it, and even though it's kind of complicated to do at times, which sort of comes to the question of, I guess for Keith, or even others, you talked about getting a consultant or a third party to sort of look at your house. I'm just sort of curious whether you find a lot of them around, and how much that kind of cost is, because right now people are dealing with, you go get a heat pump and you have Mass Save does one part a little bit there, and then somebody wants heat pump, you go to a plumber or a supply house. And so the question is, how do you get the best picture overall, and whether that's the way to go and what that might cost, and the ease of that. It's the microphone behind you.
Yeah.
You just shut that.
So I just got a quote. The guy I'm hiring is going to cost roughly $2,200. And they're going to come out, even though I've done all the tests, they're going to go through the whole process. They're going to test the air tightness of the building. They're going to notify me of all the ways that I can leverage these incentives, especially for my addition. And I'm going to also do the audit again, because it's now been over 2 years. And one of the choices I had made earlier on was I decided to, because I would have a propane backup when the temperatures dropped too cold, that I decided to get an on-demand hot water heater that's propane, and I wish I hadn't. It's only 4 or 5 years old, and I'm probably going to scrap it and go to a heat pump system. And the benefit is that I'm going to spend about $2,200 on this consultant, but he's going to save me north of 10,000. So like pretty easy math to figure that out. Mass Save is free to come out and do the analysis. I think it's a good first step to really target the things we talked about: air sealing, getting those 75% rebates. That's kind of a no-brainer. With the energy consultant, there's a number of them in Massachusetts. Ideally, you want to pick somebody that has the experience in net zero and passive house, which most of them do. So there's a number of them that you can kind of vet like you would anyone else. Again, it's really, I am the builder, but I need a third-party verifier in order for me to get these incentives anyway. And then if you're a homeowner hiring a builder, again, like it's checks and balances. You're not just taking your builder's word for it. So the value, in my opinion, is always there. Even though I have the knowledge, I'm going to utilize that option because I think it's smart.
Do you have any questions from the chat?
I do not have any questions from the chat.
And first of all, thank you so much, everybody, our panelists here. And big deal. Everybody has a big job, and still they're coming in and speak about their respective area of expertise. So this is being taped for Sherbornites and other people to see, and I want our representative from NICO come up, because all of what we heard today, these improvements that you can do at the house, it starts with your home energy assessment. And I want to give this opportunity to Dan to speak about this program, because we have partnered with All in Energy, and Energy has picked NICO for Sherborn to be the preferred contractor when it comes to the home energy assessment. And with that, Dan, please.
All right. Thanks, Dorothea. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I'll be really brief. Great presentations from everybody. Really informative. Great details. So what do you do and where do you start? So we learned a lot of different things today, but on the implementation side, where do you begin is a little bit overwhelming, and how do you do it cost effectively? The simple gist of it is, you see my table over there. You can go through what's called the Mass Save program. They touched upon how most of the Sherborn residents do not have natural gas hookups, but Eversource is in this town. So the way the program works is, if you have National Grid or Eversource, whether or not you know it, you're paying into the Mass Save program on your bill. It's just kind of like taxes in a town. You then can use public parks, police, fire department. You don't pay again. That's the gist of it. You are now entitled, because you have Eversource, to be able to do a no-cost home energy assessment. You can do, and then everything that they touched upon, I'm not going to say everything, most of what they touched upon, you can do through us. The insulation, the weatherization, air sealing. Weatherization and air sealing is no cost through Mass Save. Insulation is 75% off. We connect you with all of the rebates on heating and cooling that they were talking about. We'll do an informational visit, let you know what we're currently offering. You get thermostat upgrades at no cost, and you get energy efficient power strips. So most of what you saw covered today in these awesome presentations can be implemented through the Mass Save program. Where do you start? You do a no-cost home energy assessment. It probably takes me 3 minutes to make you an appointment today, right from my iPad. So that's the gist. I'm not a public speaker. Everybody go easy on.
Thank you so much, Dan. So that was a very nice panel. And I wanted to say, since we started this program with NICO, the 70 plus homes actually did or have signed up for home energy assessment. That's probably 1,000 homes to go. So well, we won't give up. Carrie, thank you for moderating. We're looking forward to do maybe another panel about electrification of municipal buildings and of homes, because that's an issue that a lot of Sherbornites are questions about, and that will come down our pike, and that will be in the beginning of May. With that, thank you so much for coming and for paying attention to this big opportunity to help the planet and our beloved Sherborn. Thank you.
Thank you.